I'm Dr. Robert Brown, Professor of History here at FLCC. Welcome to our annual Islamic Heritage Month event. This is our opportunity to promote greater understanding of the richness and diversity of the world's second largest religion, and to recognize and celebrate the cultural, economic, intellectual contributions of the world's 1.8 billion Muslims and America's 3.3 million. Today I have the honor of introducing Dr. Shalahudin Kafrawi, who is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. He is a world-recognized expert on Quranic studies and Islamic philosophy and thought. He earned his doctorate at Binghamton University, and his many publications include the 2008 work, Globalization and Civilization, Are They Forces in Conflict? And Islam Between Globalization and Counterterrorism. He's also contributed to the Oxford Encyclopedia of the Modern Islamic World and the Encyclopedia of Islam and the Muslim World. So without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Kafrawi.
Assalamu alaikum. Salam alaikum. That is an expression of salam. That is a greeting that Muslims use to greet one another. That is an expression that Muslims use to start a forum. And behind it, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, is the message of Islam, Islam's primary message of spreading peace. Despite of that, we know that peace, salam, is one of the most important challenges that Muslims are facing right now. Now, American public discourse has scrutinized Islam and Muslims under microscope. Some scholars have viewed Islam as one of the world's major religions with their set principle and issues, like Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Native American religions, and all other religious traditions. Islam has common concerns and purposes. We have different theories on what religion is and what religion does, what purpose religion does for the individuals and the community. And one of the theories is the theory that is attributed by the Romanticists. The Romantic theory of religion argues that religion serves the function of creating and maintaining stable and peaceful communities. You can see this in the discussion of Bruce Lincoln's Holy Terror, for example. Now, despite these similar concerns, religion also have their own internal problems and issues. With its open interpretive paradigm, Islam shared with Christianity, with Judaism and other religious traditions, the burden of allowing a room for interpretation that support superiority and leaving less room for addressing the reality of multicultural society. The very paradigm that is meant to open tolerance has also been used to support intolerance. In scrutinizing Islam, other scholars consider Islam to be distinct from especially Judeo-Christian traditions, despite the fact that Islam is one of the three Abrahamic religions, which share similar storyline, which share similar beliefs and practices. In this latter view, Islam and its followers have been portrayed negatively as exclusionary, intolerant, violent, extremist, anti-democracy, anti-progress, anti-science, anti-rationality, anti-woman, and very many other antis. In short, according to this second view, Islam has been viewed as antithetical to Western values and practices. While such a simplistic characterization is absurd, historical, and based on misconception of even Islam's most basic principles and tenets, there are some truths to it that need further examinations by scholars of religion. You all are scholars of religion by studying religion. For an illustration, Islam, as it portrays itself, is a religion of peace. The word Islam derives from the word salima, yaslimu, salman, wa salamatan, which means to be peaceful, to be healthy, to be sound, to be logical, to be healthy. From this intransitive word, we have the word aslama, that is Arabic word, aslama, yuslimu, islaman. Aslama means the transitive form of that word salam, to be peaceful, to be healthy. Aslama means to make it healthy. Aslama means to make it peaceful. Aslama means to bring peace into reality. Aslama yuslimu islaman means the actualization of Islam's message of peace. That is the original meaning of the word Islam. The very name of this religion that 1.4 billion of world population adheres to. From this etymology, the word Islam is theologically understood as making peace, bringing peace into reality through the submission or through the surrender to Allah. Allah is just an Arabic word for God. Etymologically, it derives from the word ilahun, which means a God. And then we put a definite article in the beginning, al-ilah, the God. From a God into God with capital G in English. It's the same thing. But then because it's been used very often, al-ilah has been used to become Allah, one single word. But etymologically it derives from the word al and ilah, the God or God in English vocabulary. Now, despite this theological understanding of Islam as bringing peace into actuality through the surrender to God, despite this, various parts of the Muslim world are filled with intolerance and violence. Some Shiites and Sunnites fight between one another. Some Muslims of Palestine are at war with the Jews of Israel. Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda, for example, you can see Keppel and Mileli has a text, Al-Qaeda in its own word. In that text, we have the declaration of Osama bin Laden, the declaration of jihad against the United States and its allies, including Israel, including various parts of the Muslim world that align themselves with the United States. Now today, I would like to examine Islam's internal logic to address the challenge of the contemporary world. A special attention will be given to whether Islam lays the foundation for addressing contemporary issues in progressive manner, considering the circumstances of the moment that are in large part or slightly different from the moment of Islam's dawn of Quranic revelation. With this perspective, we may be able to extend to other problems faced by both Muslims and Muslims alike, such as the pervasiveness of intolerance in our societies. Another problem that may be addressed by understanding this perspective that we have, we may address the rise of religious extremism and violence in the Muslim world and also in our midst. Now, to start our discussion, I will start with the contextuality of Islamic revelation. This is important because Muslims would measure anything that is Islamic with the sources of Islam. We have the Quran, we have the Hadith or Sunnah or prophetic tradition, when we also have what is called ijtihad. Ijtihad is independent reasoning of Muslims. It is often specific to the legal reasoning of Islamic intellectual tradition. And as you might notice, the word jihad that has been understood in Western vocabulary as Muslims fight against its enemies, against non-Muslims, has the same word has the same root of the word ijtihad, independent reasoning. Ijtihad over there, jihad and ijtihad has the letter J, H, and D. Ijtihad means, while jihad means struggle in general term, as Muslims understand it, could be to better oneself, could be going to the mosque, could be observing the rituals, could be going to the classroom or going to work at whatever profession Muslims have. But it could also mean the struggle against Islam's enemies. At the time of Prophet Muhammad, Muhammad was instructed to stand up against the non-Muslims of Mecca who were attacking Muslims while they migrated to Medina. That specific instance is an instance of jihad that has been often misunderstood in Western sensibilities as Islam's physical fight or holy war. Now, if we see this, the word jihad and ijtihad has the same root. The only difference is we have the additional I in the beginning, and then we have the T, and then I, T, those are the consonant that make up the word ijtihad, which means real struggle. When Muslims are doing independent legal reasoning, they are of course challenged to really take heart, to really struggle, to find common issues, to find solutions to the problem that they are facing, whatever the problem is. But the problem in ijtihad is intellectual problem. Now, this is the third source of Islam. And that has been manifested in Islamic intellectual tradition in different forms. For example, it is the independent reasoning of Muslims that they come up with ijma, or the consensus of Muslim scholars, the consensus of Muslim society. Ijtihad, or legal reasoning of Muslim, has also been manifested in qiyas. Qiyas means analogical reasoning. If it is if the Quran speak about not telling your parents, saying something, an expression of hesitance to do things that your parents ask you to do, then what about hurting their feeling? What about and then abandoning our parents? Through qiyas, Muslims come up with the idea, well, Muslims should not abandon their parents. Muslims should care their parents. And then the logic continues on. We can apply this principle in various different problems that Muslims face. And then the third manifestation of ijtihad is maslahah, which means public good, common good. And then the last one is adah. Adah means the custom of the society. It was the custom of the society that when Muslims went out from their home, at the time of the warfare where Muhammad and early generation of Muslims lived, it is not safe for a Muslim woman to go out by themselves. And so that's the practice of the adab, the custom of the society, that women went out with the companionship of their close relatives, with their male relatives. And what about the adah of Muslim society in the United States, which is in the present moment? It's totally different, right? And so with this, the three sources of Islam, Muslims would measure anything that is regarded as Islamic, whether they have the sources from these three. If it is not, if the source is CNN or even Fox News, then it's not legitimate reasoning for Muslims to consider such an act as Islamic. I asked my student whether Islam support terrorism. And some of my students say, yes, Islam support terrorism. And what is the basis of it? Well, 9/11 happened. Anything else? Yeah, there are so many bombing in various parts of the Muslim world. There are so many bombing in a suicide mission in Israel-Palestinian area, and the list continues on and on. But none of those is found in Quran, Hadith, or ijtihad. So to consider an act to be Islamic or not Islamic, we need to find the source, either it is the Quran, prophetic tradition, or Hadith. Now, at the core of these sources, Quran, Hadith, and ijtihad, we have the view that Allah has spoken. The God of Islam has spoken. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the God of Islam, has spoken to Prophet Muhammad. His word, his speech was given to Prophet Muhammad, and his speech is recorded in the Quran. The Quran is the word of God, with the implication that the Quran's truth claim is regarded as absolute and universal. Its 6,000 plus verses are faultless and relevant to Muslims regardless of their spatial and temporal circumstances. Like natural phenomena, we have rain, we have wind, we have the alteration of day and night, all things in nature. Like all of those, Muslims perceive the verses of the Quran as the sign of the divine, as the sign of the truth. Now, these Quranic verses serve as guide for Muslims to live happy and peaceful in this world. And these verses of the Quran are meant as their guide to achieve salvation and eternal and peaceful life in the hereafter. Despite this, despite the perception of Muslims that the Quran is very important, and so the implication is the spoken word of God recorded in the Quran has absolute and universal implication. However, the Quran historically took into account the cultural conditions of pre-Islamic Arabia in the embodiment of the Quran's absolute and universal claims. The Quran was historically a contextual document. Quranic verses were given to Muhammad in the course of 23 plus years. 13 years when Muhammad was in Mecca, and 10 years after Muhammad's migration to Medina. If we read Quranic verses one by one, we will find so many references in the Quran to its historical context. Quranic verses literally states that Prophet Muhammad was asked about so and so. And Quranic verses indicate asking Muhammad, tell them Muhammad to do this and that. One example is, Yas'alunaka 'anil ahillah. That is one of the Quranic verses. They ask you, Muhammad, about crescent, about the moon. What is it for? And then that Quranic verse says to Muhammad, Kul, tell them Muhammad, Kul hiya mawaqitu linnas. That is a sign of time. The question indicates time. So there is a meaning behind question. Another one, Yas'alunaka 'anil anfal. They ask you, Muhammad, about the spoil of war. And then the Quran instructs Muhammad to tell them so and so. Another example. Yas'alunaka 'anil khamri wal maisir. They ask you, Muhammad, about taking alcoholic beverages. Is it okay for Muslims to drink? Not water, of course. Is it okay for Muslims to take alcoholic beverages? Wal maisir and gambling. Is it okay for Muslims to gamble? So that is the problem faced by Muslims at the time of Prophet Muhammad. And then the Quran asked Muhammad to tell them, Kul fihima ismun kabir wa manafi'u linnas. Tell them that in those two practices, in taking alcoholic beverages, in gambling, in those two, there are some negative and there are some positive to it. Hello? So, Quranic verses has it that there are some positive and negative aspects of taking alcoholic beverages and gambling. And the Quran asks Muhammad to tell the people nothing other than those two kinds of information. There are positive and negative side to these two practices. And I can talk more about that in different instances when I talk about the disciplines in Quranic studies. I think we are good without speaker. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, right? Okay, good. So I'll just continue. And so we have this illustration of the crescent and the stars. We have the illustration of the spoil of war, and we have the illustration of taking alcoholic beverages and gambling. What is Islamic stance on those practices? What is Islamic stance on those natural phenomena? And as we have it from those Quranic verses, it took into consideration the existing context. So we cannot understand the Quranic verse without understanding the context of revelation. And then another element of the contextuality of the Quran is the theology of Islam that highlights the common origin of the sacred texts, including the Quran, including the Torah, including the Gospel and the Psalm. Muslims have it, as we have it in the Quran. We have the notion of Kitab, the mother of the book. So Muslims believe that theologically there is such thing as ledger. It's great book that contains everything. This great book is absolute. This great book is very universal. This great book, when it is manifested in certain historical moment, then it's revealed as the Torah of the Jewish community. From the mother of the book, from this great ledger book, when the historical moment requires its revelation, then it gets embodied into the gospel, into the Psalm of David. And finally, as Muslims believe, from this ledger book, we have the embodiment of it in the Quran itself. Now, this, of course, takes into consideration the existing traditions in pre-Islamic Arabia, including Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, and many other traditions. We have it in other Quranic verses, for example, on who is going to be saved in Quranic point of view. They said that the Quran has it that the Jews, the Christians, the Sabian, as long as they believe in God and as long as they believe in the day of reckoning, they shouldn't be worried about what's going to happen to them. They will be saved, just as Muslims are. So that's the contextuality of the Quran. If we read the Quran page by page, there are references to Jews, Christians, and their prophets. But before we do that, somebody might want to go further into some beliefs of Muslims that affirm the contextuality of the Quran. For example, we have the notion of the mother of the book, Umul Kitab. That mother of the book is guarded in his side, in what is called Lawh al-Mahfuz. And then it's descended in lower context, and that is the context of the heaven of our earth, in our atmosphere somewhere. It's theological concept in Baitul Izzah, and then continues on until it's given to Prophet Muhammad in 23 years of his prophetic career. Now, the Quran also speaks about the prophets of Islam. Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad is, of course, the prophet of Islam. In one of the pillars of Islam, in the declaration of faith, Muslims would say, Ashhadu, I testify, an la ilaha illallah, that there is no God but God. Wa ashhadu, and I testify, anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, that Muhammad is his prophet. And so it is formal requirement for Muslims, like it is formal requirement in Christianity to have baptism, it is formal requirement for Muslims to express Shahada. And one of the articles of the Shahada is the testimony on oneness and unity of God and on Muhammad's prophethood. We might find, in addition to that, in the Quran, other prophets of God. Does it mean when Muslims make the testimony that Muhammad is the messenger of God or the prophet of God, does that mean that Islam is by nature exclusionary? It's very exclusivist. Well, let's see whether that is the case. But for those of you who are not familiar with Islam, this is the 5 pillars of the religion, and the first one being the Shahada. Now, in the Shahada, to that question whether believing in Muhammad as his prophet means Muslims are exclusive, let's see what Muslims have with regard to that question in 6 articles of Muslims' faith. To be Muslim, and this is accepted among the most liberal Muslims to the most conservative one, because that is the tradition that is handed down from generation to the other, and Muslims in general believe in these 6 articles of faith. Just as Muslims believe in the 5 pillars of Islam, they also believe in the 6 articles of faith. The first one is one God. Believe in one and only God. Monotheistic tradition, like Judaism and Christianity. And then another article of faith is believing in angels, whose purpose is to serve God. And then the third one is believing in sacred texts. One is not called Muslim until that person believes in the sacred text that is given to Prophet Muhammad, that was also given to previous prophets, including the Torah, Gospel, Psalm of David, and the Quran itself. So it's traditional account. Muslims, regardless of their intellectual alliance, for example, would believe in the sacred texts, including the Torah, the Gospel, Psalm of David, and the Quran itself. And then another one is believe in the prophets and messenger of God, or Rasulullah. And if we see Quranic verses, we have at the very least 25 prophets of God that are mentioned in the Quran. And Muslims have to believe in these prophets, including Muhammad himself, including Jesus, including John the Baptist, including Jonah, Joseph, Abraham, Isaac, Ismail, and all the way into the first humankind according to Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition, or to simplify the term, that is the Abrahamic tradition. So, according to Quranic point of view, Adam was a prophet of God. How much farther do you expect of the inclusive nature of Islamic theology? Jesus was the central figure in Christianity, and the Quran respects that. No Muslim can be called Muslim until that person recognizes that Jesus is a prophet of God, respected individual in the chain of revelation of the message of God. And that goes all the way to the first prophet in the first humankind. If there were another person, maybe the Quran would recognize that as the first prophet of God. So the message of God starts from that moment. So the Quran has 25 prophets. And then, if we see another source of Islam, Hadith, in Hadith literature there is mentioned there are 313 prophets of God. 25 of them are mentioned explicitly in the Quran. The rest are not mentioned, which opens up the possibility maybe there are other prophets of God that are not recorded in the Quran. Who knows that Socrates was one of the prophet of God, right? Who knows that Mahatma Gandhi may be one of them? But of course, that is very controversial if we raise that. But at the very least, from theological standpoint of Islam, that there are 313 prophets of God, and in another prophetic tradition, there is even mention of 30,000 prophets of God. Oh God. If they are valid prophet of God according to Quranic point of view, that shows how inclusive the message of Islam is. We might believe in this shared principle and shared values, but when it gets embodied in certain communities, here is the prophet for this community, and here's the teaching, and it continues on and on. Okay, as we have the Quran to be believed as revealed to Prophet Muhammad, and as we discussed earlier that the Quran is a historical document, Quran scholars have agreed that the Quranic verses need to be understood within their historical context. If we take the Quran outside of its historical context, very probably we will miss the point. These are the three proofs from Quranic scholarship on the need for the contextualization of Quranic verses. Quran scholars agree that Quranic verses are divided into Meccan and Medinan revelation, having in mind that the context of Meccan revelation is very much different from the context of Medinan revelation. While Muhammad was in Mecca, Muhammad was struggling to address the issues faced by the Meccans, which is the injustices, the oppression of the ruling tribe, the Quraysh, to which Muhammad belonged, but Muhammad was very concerned about what happened to many people who were under the periphery. So that is the main concern of Muhammad. And so the solution that Muhammad offered at that particular moment was theological solution, theological revolution, emphasizing on the message of unity of Islam. That the message that he received from God is also the same message that was given to Prophet Jesus. The message that Prophet Muhammad received in Mecca is in essence the same thing as the message as is embodied in Jewish scripture. And the list continues on and on. However, when Muhammad migrated to Medina, he faced different problems. The problem of creating a community that would consider individuals as part of the larger part of the civil society of Medina. So the challenges are also different. And so the solution, theological revolution, is also taking different turn. And so we have the agreement of Quran scholars on Meccan and Medinan revelations. And then we also have the agreement of Muslim scholars on the occasion of revelation, or asbabun nuzul, that certain Quranic verses have certain historical circumstances. If we don't understand those Quranic verses within their historical context, we miss the point. And we also have another subdiscipline in Quranic studies called nasakh, or nasikh mansukh, that means abrogation. And that is the belief that in the Quran, one Quranic verse is abrogated. One Quranic verse is cancelled out and replaced by another one. And so we have examples for that. I mentioned about taking alcoholic beverages and gambling, right? What was the context? And we also have another Quranic verse that speaks about the same issue. And Quranic answer was different. When Muhammad was in Mecca, the Quran praised about how he showed the people how to make wine out of grape juice. And then another Quranic verse speaks of the reward that Muslims receive in the hereafter. So we have this. But then another Quranic verse suggests that when the Muslims consider the religion is for the good of the community, and the Quran speaks about taking alcoholic beverages and gambling, and the Quran speaks about the negative aspects of taking alcoholic beverages and gambling, and yet it doesn't elaborate further. That gives us a clue that the Quran gives human being of Meccan period to think about the rationale behind certain practices. Is it for the good of the community? Is it good for the individuals? Etc. etc. The Quran shows the negative outweighs the positive. When Muslims are very certain that the message of religion is for the good of the community, then it makes more sense to ban that practice altogether. we might have some relevance over here in American campuses, right? We have the problem of gambling, and when it is related to sexual relation, and what we have is violent sexual intercourse, etc., etc. Should we ban that practice? Well, it's up to you to make the decision. But from Quranic point of view, Muslims are very certain that the religion is for the good of the community, and here the negative overweighs the positive, and so what? Ban it. And so we have another Quranic verse that says, "O you who believe, ya ayyuhalladzina amanu, ijtanibu, fajtanibu, innamal khamru wal maisiru wal ansab wal azlam rijsun min amri syaitan fajtanibu," which in short, with regard to the practice of gambling and taking alcoholic beverages, the negative overweighs the good. And so what? Stay away from those practices. Now, what many understand, many Muslims and non-Muslims alike understand, is that, stop, Muslims don't drink. It is not important to see the historical circumstances in which those Quranic verses were given to Prophet Muhammad. Quran scholars would emphasize on the importance of understanding the division of verses into Meccan and Medina revelation, into the occasion of revelation, into the abrogation. It is the belief of Muslims that the first Quranic verse that I mentioned earlier is abrogated by another one, until finally we come to the conclusion: no gambling, no taking alcoholic beverages for Muslims. Okay. Now, what does this mean for Muslim to treat the Quran as a contextual document? And how is it done? I would like to take as an illustration one scholar of the Quran called Fadlur Rahman. He's a professor of Islamic studies at Chicago University. He was originally from Pakistan, and the people of Pakistan didn't use him well. And so he immigrated to the United States, and he formulated how to understand the Quran contextually. And here is the basic thing. When we read the Quran, then we need to treat Quranic verses altogether holistically. We cannot take one Quranic verse in isolation of other Quranic verses. We cannot take a Quranic verse that instructs Muslims to stand up against the attackers in what is commonly misunderstood as jihad, right? And then the Quranic verse is taken in isolation of other Quranic verses that speak of jihad to mean general struggle to become better people. And another step is to collect Quranic verses thematically. The Quran is not a book of science. It's not chapter 1 to include all of this that is closely related to the same theme, and second chapter, and continues on and on. The Quran is a divine message. It's a book of morality. When it is necessary, the Quran speaks about some illustrations. But the message is in Quranic verses and then illustrated by many verses that support that. Now, because the illustrations spread in all over the place, Quranic verse about Moses, for example, is not located in one single chapter, but it's spread from the second chapter of the Quran to the 30th part of the Quran, including chapter 114. Then, if we are going to understand the Quran holistically, then we need to collect those verses based on the theme, based on the topic. To look another way, we have some problem. What is the problem? What is Quranic standpoint with regard to interfaith relations? Okay, so we have common theme, right? to apply this method, we need to find Quranic verses that address that issue. And then, after finding those Quranic verses, then find their literal meaning. What is the literal meaning of those Quranic verses? And then after understanding the literal meaning of those Quranic verses, Muslims are required to understand what is the essence, what is the gist, what is the spirit of those Quranic verses. In the case of taking alcoholic beverages and gambling, the essence is the embodiment of the message of the good for Muslim community. However, the particularities is different because of the different historical context. Now, the next step is to determine if the literal meanings in current context matches their essential meaning. For example, we have Quranic verses with regard to polygamy. Oh, polygamy. Does the Quran promote polygamy? Well, the Quran has it. Married 2, 3, 4. Which means what? It is permission to have polygamy. However, the Quran continues on. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدًا. If you cannot be just to them, then only one. Okay, so we have one particular instance of polygamy, Quran support for polygamy or permission for polygamy. However, it's make it as a precondition that the Muslims embody the message of justice. The message of justice is absolute and universal. The message of justice is non-negotiable. Can Muslims do just to their wives? Well, men here, even though you are not Muslim, right? The message of justice is there. Do you think it is just for men to marry multiple wives? Maybe some men would say, yes, I can. At the very least, outside of marriage, we have some kind of encounter outside of that, right? And so we have multiplicity of our spouses. Now, with this, does the Quran allow the practice of polygamy? In that specific instance, yes, it permits Muslims for polygamy, but it makes it a precondition that Muslims embody justice. If they cannot be just, then absolutely only one. But then there is another Quranic verse, and this is the value of the second and the third one. What is the essence behind it? After making the comparison, we have the Quranic verse that says, وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ. You, men, will never be able to be just to your wives. And the Quran capitalized lan, which means ever. If the message of justice is the precondition for any marital relationship, and there is a divine guarantee from that Quranic verse that Muslim men cannot be just to their wives, what is the meaning behind it? Monogamy. All right. We can have more discussion on that, but thank you, and I would like to get your comment. I need to learn more. Okay? Comment and question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Travis, by the way. How are you?
Nice to meet you, Travis.
I just have, gathering from what you're saying, what you've been telling us and everything like that, do you feel there needs to be any fundamental reformation of Islam, or is it going fine the way it is?
Well, the central question that I ask is whether the Quran provides some kind of groundwork to reform itself. By that I mean, is there some fundamental principle in the Quran that allows Muslims to have different interpretations that make different outlook on the embodiment of the message of Islam? And the simple answer to that question is yes. Yes, of course. If you would like to study more, we have a very good book by Western scholar called Tariq Ramadan. He has a book called Radical Reform. It outlines how the tradition of Islam's legal discourse paved the way for the reform. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's funny, as an American woman, the first thought that came to mind when we were talking about men having, choosing more than one wife was, do you think it is just for women to have more than one husband? It's the first thing I thought of, because it's, the point of view is from the man. So,
Okay.
if that discussion came up with a group of people who are Muslim, what would they do with it? Just
That is very good question. And Muslims have yet to answer that kind of question. And that same question is also a challenge for Christianity. It's also a challenge for the Jewish community, and challenge for kind of the so-called traditional religious traditions. And so far, I don't find anybody who would justify that. And so it's a good question. Yes.
How is Sharia law, the Quran, come on?
Okay, very good. The Quran has it, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا, which means every single religious community has its own sharia, its own way of life. That's what the Quran says. So the sharia of Adam is different from the sharia of Moses. The sharia of Moses is different from the sharia of Jesus. And the sharia of Muhammad is also different. So that is Quranic standpoint. Now, what is sharia in the actual discussion among Muslim scholars? The legal mind of Muslim scholarship has it that sharia is a way of life. Like Shara'a yashri'u shir'atan, it's like the embodiment of Taoism. Tao gets embodied. It's like the flowing of the river. Sharia is like that. It's a way of life. Now, when we talk about sharia in what is called Islamic law consists of fiqh, F-I-Q-H, which means particular law, particular positive law. Okay? And then the second one is usul fiqh, U-S-U-L, usul fiqh, which means the principle of Islamic law. Now, we cannot understand fiqh, which is one form of sharia, without understanding the principle that makes it possible for fiqh to have some kind of actualization. In Islamic legal discourse, we have at the very least, traditionally, we have the Malikite school of Islamic law. We have Hanafite school of Islamic law. We have Hanbalite school of Islamic law. We have Shafi'ite school of Islamic law, and among the Shiite, we also have the Ja'fari school of Islamic law. We call that fiqh, particular embodiment of Islamic law. That is not itself Sharia. One instance of Islamic law as this scholar understood it. And in fact, Imam Shafi'i, the last of the four of the Sunnite school of Islamic law, have two different versions of fiqh. One is fiqh or the Sharia as he understood it when he was in Baghdad, and then another one is the one that is different when he emigrated to Egypt. Now, common conception or common misconception is to treat one particular school of Islamic law, which is one form of fiqh, one form of Islamic law, and make it that as if that is Sharia, which is a misconception. Now, Sharia, which might also be understood within this specific context, is similar to the principle of Islamic law. principle. Of course, it's different. Of course, Muslims believe that Sharia is the absolute and universal law of Islam. And yet, there is nothing in particular that this is Sharia. Media has it, cutting off one's hand among Arabian society in Saudi Arabia is regarded as Sharia. No, that is fake. One particular interpretation of Sharia. We can talk more about that.
To follow up, how about the concept of sin?
The sin.
Sin.
Okay, how about that as it relates to Sharia?
I'm saying if someone, do they commit sins if they don't follow the Quran?
Mhm.
And what is the
Okay.
consequences of that?
Okay, we have prophetic tradition that says sin is ma haka fi sadrik, something that hurts your heart, something that hurts your heart. From legal point of view, what is regarded as sinful act is the act that violates Islamic law. Right? Now, we need to understand that Islamic law is not Islam. It's part of Islam. There is another dimension of Islam, spiritual tradition, and what we call tasawwuf or Islamic mysticism. We also have another dimension that emphasizes on the theological supposition in what is called kalam. And so, sin as an Islamic principle is not exclusive to Islamic law. Yes, there are some scholars who argue that when one violates the principle of Islamic law, which as I said earlier, is it Sharia or fiqh? If it is Sharia, then of course it violates Islamic principle. When it is fiqh, that is one interpretation of Islamic law. And so, what happened to those who are sinful? Some would argue that there are certain repercussions to it. Some embodiment of what needs to be done to the sinful people. For example, you may have it on the news, right? The practice of stoning to death, right? But that is one interpretation of Islamic law. And we have in Islamic spiritual tradition and Islamic theology the concept that God is all forgiving. People are making mistakes, yes. As long as it concerns between God and human beings, then it is God to make the decision on what's going to do with those sinful people. But as it relates to humankind, then there is a law to be followed. The law that is agreed upon by certain religious communities.
I have a couple questions. The first one, in Christian belief, like it says in the Bible, do not join yourself in an equal yoke, meaning like do not marry someone who does not share your same faith. Is there something like that in Islamic tradition?
Of course, there is one interpretation like that. But we also have the theological concept in Islam that Muslim can marry among the people of the book. Muslim can marry Jews, Muslim can marry Christians. If we remember one Quranic verse that I mentioned earlier, we have the tradition of the Sabian community. They have different interpretation who the Sabians are. Are they Jewish, are they Christian, or others? One interpretation has it the Sabians are religious communities beyond Muslims, Jews, and Christians. But yes, we have disagreement on that. And what I would like to emphasize is that while you may find that there is one point of view, according to one Quran scholar, I would like to emphasize that is one interpretation of Islam.
And
Okay.
the other question is, in Christian belief, Jesus is the highest prophet, but not also he's the highest prophet. He's like God incarnated in the flesh. Is Muhammad, by like the same? Like,
Oh, well,
is he God in the flesh for the Muslim people?
The religious supremacy is everywhere. John has said that I am Jesus is the only way to salvation, right? If you would like to be saved, then you have to be Christian. Can you be Muslim and be saved? Of course, according to that specific passage in the Bible, of course not, right? If we see in Jewish tradition, we have Deuteronomy that says, if your close relatives ask you to worship God other than me, what should we do? Show them no compassion. Surely you shall kill them. That's in Deuteronomy, right? Check your sacred text. And we have something similar in Islam, which says, Inna dina indallahi Islam. Indeed, the religion before God is Islam. Whoever seeks religion other than Islam, then his effort or her effort would be futile. But we need to understand those sacred texts within their historical context. Without understanding within their historical context, then we miss the point. And specific to our Quranic outlook on how to read that Quranic verse, we also have the Quranic verse that says, "Ma kana Ibrahimu Yahudiyan wala Nasraniyan," that Abraham was neither Jewish nor Christian, but instead he was Hanifan. He was a pure religious individual, Musliman. Muslim, meaning submissive to the will of God. Some would say, okay, that Abraham was Muslim, literally, it's mentioned in the Quran. But is it making any sense to say that there was Islam before Islam came to being? Right? And so, there must be some essence that the Quran would like to convey through that Quranic verse. And that is the message of submission to the will of God. That is true of Judaism, true of Christianity, true of Muslims as well. And with regard to that religious supremacy, we also have different ways of handling that across traditions, of course.
I better bring things to a close. I think many people have to dash off to 2 o'clock classes, but please, round of applause for Dr. Kafrawi.
Thank you all.